Awesome. Hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to join me today to talk all about pumping. It's going to be a good day. And so I wanted to start with disclosures, and then I'm going to share about what we're going to learn about. We'll dive in, talk about it all, and at the end, I'm going to leave some time for questions. But I wanted to start by saying I'm really excited to share all about pumping today. My goal today is to leave you feeling empowered about your parenting decisions. If you followed me for a while, you know that I believe you know your baby best, and my job is to walk beside you and help you lean into that. And I want to give a huge thank you to Annabella Pumps because they graciously agreed to sponsor this webinar, and I'm really grateful for that. Let's start with who I am. If you don't know me, my name is Carrie Bruno. I am a registered nurse and an IBCLC lactation consultant, and I started the Mama Coach 10 years ago. It is my life's work to do this, to support women and families. To say I'm obsessed is an understatement. I care deeply for each and every one of you, and I hope you can feel that today. And if you're in my community on Instagram online. So what are we going to talk about today? I want to start by talking about when should you pump, why should you pump, talking about different pumps themselves, and then we're going to go into different scenarios that will touch on all scenarios. So regardless of your feeding journey, you are going to find something of value here today. And then we're going to talk about how you can increase output when you're pumping, and we'll end with a question and answer period. But before I start, I want to just remind you that feeding your baby is highly personal in a world full of noise. You probably turn on your phone or talk to a neighbor or your mother-in-law or something, and there's a million opinions on how you should be feeding your baby. But I'm here to tell you that you need to do what works best for your baby and what works best for you and your entire family unit. And whatever that is the right way to feed your baby. And I want you to lean into that. And you're doing a good job. So let's dive in. One other thing is that there's a chat. If you have questions, you can put it in the chat, and I'll try and get to as many as I can at the end of the presentation. So let's talk about why you should pump. So here's the thing. If you are exclusively breastfeeding and you're 100% sure that you don't want or need to give your baby a bottle, then you may not need to pump. It's not something that everybody needs to do. However, many people have circumstances that require their baby to take a bottle. And in that instance, most times you're going to want to pump. And so some of these examples are right out of the gates. If you are working to get your baby up to birth weight, or we're slow to gain weight, or maybe you've had some breastfeeding challenges, maybe breastfeeding hurts, that is a circumstance where you would pump while we figure that out. Another one is when you want to give your baby a bottle sometimes. So maybe you want to go out for dinner, or maybe you want to go to the gym, or maybe you want to rest. That is good and okay. In that instance, you would pump and give your baby a bottle. The other really common circumstance is going back to work. There is a huge range on when people return to work, and just because you go back to work doesn't mean you should have to end your breastfeeding journey unless it's something you want to do. But if you go back to work, how do we balance pumping, bottles, and breastfeeding? We're going to talk about that. And then there's also exclusive pumping, which we'll talk about as well. But let's just touch on the different types of pumps. So there are silicone pumps. You've probably seen them. They kind of attach and suction onto your breast while you're feeding your other baby. Well, you're feeding your baby on the other breast. These pumps are not meant to increase your supply. They're just meant to catch your letdown. So if you are separated from your baby, you're going to need something more than a silicone pump. There's also the single manual pumps, so that you're literally using your fingers to operate the pump. Those are for like random once in a while pumpers. And then we have hands-free pumps. You've probably seen them. They fit inside your bra. They can be great. They can be hit or miss though, in terms of suction and getting the most output that you possibly can. Excuse me. So they're not a great primary pump. And then we have double electric pumps. So these are pumps for people who plan to collect milk to give a bottle to their baby. So this is the Annabella double pump here. It is unique because it's really more than a pump. So of course it has the vacuum suction, but it also mimics your baby. I'll show you. So it provides a lot of stimulation, that extra stimulation, mimicking your baby right at the nipple and the areola, which I think is cool. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So when should you start to pump? I get a lot of questions about this. And the answer is it's going to be different based on your circumstance. For example, if you have a baby who is born early or born at term but then goes to the NICU, you are probably going to need to pump in that immediate postpartum period. And it's important to pump in the immediate postpartum period if you're separated from your baby, because that stimulation is going to set you up long-term milk supply. So it's subbing in for your baby till the two of you can be reunited. And there is a lot of research that shows us that starting pumping when you're in the postpartum period, so within those first 12 weeks, has a lot of long-term benefits. And if you start pumping using the pump that you plan to use in that postpartum period, your body will be more responsive to it when you're 4 months postpartum, 5 months postpartum. So what happens in those first 12 weeks is important. And so what week postpartum should you be starting if you had I'll use the word standard birth, where your baby stayed with you, your baby is breastfeeding. So when should you start to pump? There's really kind of two things for my rules of thumb here. The first is 4 to 6 weeks postpartum is a great time. If you're going back to work at 8 weeks, I would probably start sooner. But 4 to 6 weeks is a good general range, or when you have breastfeeding established. And how I describe or define breastfeeding being established is your baby back to birth weight, and can you latch your baby independently and things are trucking along? If you say yes to both, then it is a great time to introduce pumping, and I'll talk about how we're going to do this. But I cannot tell you just this, because if you just start pumping and collecting milk, that's fantastic. But if you forget the vital step of introducing the bottle to your baby, so the vessel in which you're going to get that milk to your baby, they need to go hand in hand. This is a skill most easily picked up from your baby when they still have that sucking reflex, which is within those first 12 weeks. So when you start to pump, you are going to start introducing a bottle. But what I will tell you is it doesn't have to replace a feed. You can just give an ounce every single day. It doesn't have to be when your baby's hungry. Think about it as like muscle memory. If you do it every day with your baby, then it's not going to be a huge shock to your baby 3 months down the road when you want to give a full bottle and you're separated from your baby. We'll talk more about that in a bit. And so this is so important. If you take one thing away from today, it's this. If you pump to optimize your pumping experience, your flange needs to fit properly. And many pumps come with flanges that are way too big for, most women. And so you can pump with a flange that's too big, but here's the thing, you will not get as much milk as if you pump with a flange that fits properly. Pumping should not hurt. If you take the pump off and you notice that your areola is angry and swollen, that is a sign that your pump flange is too big. So I want to give you a tip on how you're going to measure flange size. So when you're measuring, we are not measuring your areola. So this circular dark part, that's called the areola. And this is your nipple. You are measuring the diameter of your nipple. This is the chart that Annabella gave me, and you can just sit your nipple and figure out which size fits best, or you can take a ruler and measure in millimeters across the diameter of your nipple. And here's the thing, it is going to change. So if you measure in pregnancy because you're purchasing a pump, that's fantastic. But know that you'll probably have to measure again in that postpartum period, and it's going to be bigger. Your nipples are going to be bigger than they are going to be after that 12-week mark. And I see this in people who start to pump, and then at 16 weeks, they notice they're not pumping as much, and it's because their flange is now too big. Their nipples have kind of come back a little closer to what they were pre-pregnancy, and therefore they need to downsize their flange. So I want you to make sure that you've measured during the postpartum period and then afterwards. The Annabella pump is really fantastic. So it fits 18 to 24. So 18 millimeters to 24 millimeters diameter, which is fantastic. And it also fits a 25 to 28. And all you have to do, you don't have to change the flange, you just change the number here on the side, and it automatically shrinks it for you to fit your nipple properly. And there's a range there. So that's pretty slick, because a lot of pumps you have to order the extra part for every single size. So make sure that you are measuring your nipple diameter, not your areola. And you want to do this pregnancy, postpartum, and then after 12 weeks. And I would also do it before you feed your baby. And so how high should the suction be? This is a good question. And there's no real general rule of thumb, but the biggest thing is that you want to make sure that it doesn't hurt. So what I would recommend is that you want to turn up the suction. Forgot to hit play. Turn up the suction to the point that you're like, woo, and it feels a little bit painful, and then dial it back. So it should not be painful. More suction does not equal more milk. It needs to be comfortable. And you should feel this suction. It should be strong, but it should not hurt. And like I showed you before, the Annabella has the suction, but it also has the stimulation, which is really more than a breast pump. It's trying to emulate your baby suckling at the breast. I have worked with some clients that have used an Annabella pump and had a lot of luck in terms of increasing their output. And so let's talk about hands-on pumping. I'm talking about the importance of stimulation and how Annabella does that extra mode here. But the other thing you can do is hands-on pumping. So Annabella kind of emulates that here, but on top of that, what you can do is compress and massage your breast while pumping. So if you hand massage and compress your breast while the pump is on and pumping, you can express up to 45% more breast milk, and it will be higher in fat content because you're going, just like when your baby feeds, right? The longer the feed lasts on one breast, the higher the fat content. It's the same with a pump. If you are expressing and massaging at the same time, plus the stimulation mode, you are going to express more milk. So what I would do is use a hands-free pumping bra for your pump, and as much as you can, because I get it, you have to care for a baby too, I would do as much hands-on pumping as you can. It'll give you the most bang for your buck. And so how long should you pump for? And here's the thing, it is going to be different for every single one of you watching. It's going to be based on your storage capacity. It's going to be based on your milk supply. And here's what I want you to think about. The goal of each pumping session should be to empty your breasts. I say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, knowing your breasts are never completely empty. Your body is incredible. Even if your baby woke up right after you pumped and you fed them, your body would continue to generate milk. What I mean by empty is your breast should feel soft. If you take your pump off and they still feel heavy and full, something isn't right. We need to troubleshoot that. The other red flag is time. If you notice, the average pumping session is around 15 to 20 minutes. If you find you're having to pump 30 minutes in order for your breast to feel soft, that's a red flag. Something is going on. And we want to fit your pump properly. We want to take a good look so that you can shorten up that pumping time. Longer does not equal more milk all the time. It's not sustainable to try and think you're going to have to pump for 30 minutes every single time you need to pump. And so now we're going to dive in to how often should you pump. And this is going to depend on the reason why you're pumping. So these are the situations that we're going to go over here. So the first one is pumping to increase supply and weight gain. And I want to start by saying, if this is you, I see you. In some worlds, this is called triple feeding, right? You try to breastfeed your baby, and then you pump, and then you give a bottle, and then you repeat. And it is so hard if that's you. And my challenge with this and my frustration with this as a healthcare provider is that this is not a sustainable plan. And we need to make one to help you move from triple feeding to breastfeeding, if that's your goal, with offering a bottle when you want to, if that's your goal. So how do we do this? So like I mentioned, the common way that you've probably, tell me in the chat if you've heard this before. So try to feed your baby for 10 minutes or 20 minutes. And then what you're going to do is supplement with pumped milk or formula. My challenge with this is that we do not learn new things well when we're hungry, and your baby is no different. And so if you're trying to practice breastfeeding with a baby who's hungry and learning to breastfeed, baby is going to be frustrated. It's not going to go great. You are going to watch your baby get frustrated at the breast, which is heartbreaking as a parent. And then your baby is going to learn that they become satisfied with the bottle, and you're going to watch that too. And that's hard. So what I recommend, if this is you and you are triple feeding, is we're going to reverse it. So what you're going to do is not give a full feed. So using pumped breast milk, I would give a quarter to a half of a standard feed. So you don't want to fill your baby to the brim, because then they're not going to be interested. We're giving them enough milk to take the edge off, just like this. And so you are pace feeding here. We're not feeding this way. We're pacing our baby this way. They will stop and start, just very similar to breastfeeding. So we're offering a quarter to a half of what a standard feed would be for your baby. Now your baby is not starving, right? They're going to be more tolerant of learning. And the beauty with that is once you latch your baby to the breast, they are going to stay here longer. It works. Instead of watching the clock, so now we're not trying for so many minutes, we are watching your baby. Big sucks and swallows. And when they slow, we're going to do breast compression. And then when they slow, we're going to offer the other side, which I call dessert. They may or may not take it. Your baby will stay here longer. And then what happens is you will probably at the beginning, because they're learning, you might have to finish the feed with more supplement, more pumped breast milk. So it might go pump breast milk, breastfeed, pump breast milk. But here's the thing, then you're going to pump, right? So that's work there. So you pump afterwards. But the goal will be that you move to giving a bottle and then ending at the breast and then pumping, moving to just breastfeeding and pumping when you need to. Doing it this way will give you a plan so that you're not feeling like you have to triple feed forever. In my experience, this is a huge reason why women end up switching, because it's just so much. Because on top of that, you're caring for your baby. So here's some other tips for triple feeding and the way that I'm suggesting you do it is get help, because on top of caring for your baby and everything I just said, we need to wash all your pump parts, and that's a job in itself. Who can help you with this? The next thing I would encourage you to do is make sure you're storing your milk, these are the Annabella ones, in 1 to 3 ounce bags. Don't store in more than that because you're going to have waste. I like to have a collection. Some 1 ounce, some 2 ounce, some 3 ounce, so you can pick and choose. And another thing is don't store them upright in the freezer, lay them flat, because then you can store a lot more in a smaller space in your freezer. And then the other thing is make sure you are working with somebody who's helping you, because a lot of times people do this way longer than they need to. So have a plan in place for weaning off this process. Can you tell I'm passionate about that? I just see it so much in my practice, and I hate to see people struggle with that. So hopefully you took something from that. The next thing I want to talk about is pumping to offer a bottle sometimes. So this is for the person who wants to sleep for 4 hours. That is okay. Or you want to go for a walk or go for dinner. All of those are good reasons to give a bottle sometimes. So what do we need to talk about here? You need to, first of all, same thing, make sure that your flange fits properly. The next thing is about expectation. So I want you to remember that you are feeding your baby plus pumping. The internet confuses us about how much milk we should see here. You are feeding your baby. Anything you pump is above and beyond that. So don't get discouraged. It is very, very typical to pump 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce combined after you feed your baby. Some will pump more and some will pump less. How much milk you see in here when you are also breastfeeding your baby has nothing to do with whether your baby is getting enough milk. Is your baby satisfied at the breast? Are they happy in between feeds? Are they having enough wet and dirty diapers? And are they maintaining their growth curve? Yes. Well, then any pumping we're doing above and beyond that is extra. And so remember that, okay? So it's going to be a slow and steady process in terms of building up some milk for you to give your baby sometimes. Often it doesn't happen in one feeding session. Sometimes it can. It really depends. And so when is the best time to pump if you are just going to be giving a bottle every now and then? My best suggestion is morning time. So your prolactin levels, so that is the hormone that's helping your body produce milk. Your prolactin levels are actually highest in the middle of the night and in the morning. And as we move closer to bedtime, your prolactin levels drop. But that doesn't mean that you have to supplement in the evening either. That is normal. It happens to all people who are breastfeeding. And so morning is a beautiful time. But what I will tell you is you do not want to overdo this, because I see this in my practice where people create what's called a mechanical oversupply, where they are pumping and pumping and pumping and pumping and feeding their baby, which you can see in this picture here. It tells your body to make enough milk for your baby plus all the pumping. And then all of a sudden you got a lot of milk and your baby is starting to have symptoms of this, where they are spitting up more. They are incredibly fussy. They're choking and sputtering at the breast. These are all signs that you have taken on too much too fast. So a little bit at a time. Here is an example of how we're going to do it. So your baby wakes up in the morning and you're going to feed them when they wake up. So breastfeed them. Then you're going to offer a feed when they go down again. I call it the mama's method. So milk, activity, which is play, more milk, which is just offer. Some babies take it, some don't. How you'll know if your baby wants it is big sucks and swallows. If you latch your baby and they flutter suck to bring your letdown down, then big sucks and swallows, but very quickly it turns to this. That's them saying, no, I don't want it. Or maybe they just turn away, or maybe they take it. I like to offer. And then you will do your simple nap routine and put your baby down for a nap. Then I would pump. That's a beautiful time to pump, 15 to 20 minutes. And then what you're going to do is store it once you're done. It might be half an ounce, might be an ounce, it might be 2 ounces, it might be 3. And here's the thing I want to reassure you. If you pump during your baby's first nap and they wake up 7 minutes later, which happens, then you will still have enough milk for your baby. Breastfeed them. It will be okay. And what you're going to do, start on the breast that they finished on, and you're going to do a lot of breast compression. Okay? But let me reassure you that just because you pump doesn't mean your breasts are dry. You are still making milk. You just might have to help by doing a lot of breast compression. So now let's talk about returning back to work. Tell me in the chat if you are back at work or you're going back to work. I see you. That is a lot. You are learning how to parent this baby, and you are learning how to feed this baby. You are recovering from birth yourself, and now you're heading back to work, and you want to maintain that breastfeeding relationship, and it's a lot. And so let's talk about some ways to make this easier. I have worked with probably thousands now of women who have made this transition, and I'm telling you, it can be done. So let's dive in. Who here, show of hands, when I say the word freezer stash, you get anxiety, right? There is so much, yes, I see you. There is so much pressure on the internet about building a freezer stash, and pressure doesn't help anybody. So let's talk about that. How much milk do you actually have to have stored before you go back to work? Well, technically, only a day's worth, but in my opinion, that's also anxiety provoking. I think having a small enough buffer to give you an opportunity to have a hard day at work and maybe not pump as great as you should have, or you're learning how to return back to work and pump. It's a process. It won't be perfect on day one. So I recommend a buffer of 3 to 4 days worth of milk in your freezer that your baby can take. It will help you with anxiety. So let's talk about, how do you build this? This really depends on when you're returning back to work. If you're going back at 3 months, I would recommend starting as soon as you get breastfeeding established, around 3 to 4 weeks postpartum. But here's the thing, sometimes we're so nervous and anxious about this freezer stash that we go too hard. And remember a couple slides ago when I was talking about mechanical oversupply? What we do is we're breastfeeding our babies and we're pumping like crazy, and we've created this mechanical oversupply where all of a sudden our baby is so fussy, and that can be a reason why. So we have to do this slow and steady and trust in the process. I would pump 1 to 2 times a day consistently. And I would do it from the time you have breastfeeding established to you're going back to work. That will give you a buffer. I would store it, like I said, 2-ounce bags for waste, maybe a few 3s, maybe a few 1s, so that you have a selection and we're not wasting that precious milk. But the other thing I want to remind you is how much milk do you actually need? Because I think we paint this picture in our mind that we need so much milk, right? And here is a myth. I don't know if you guys know this. You can tell me in the chat. How much milk your baby consumes is not linear. So what I mean by that is, so in that first month, your baby is taking more and more milk, but once they get to about 90 to 120 mils, which is about 3 to 4 ounces, there it peaks. It peaks. So at month 1 to month 6, the amount of milk your baby takes on average is the same. Did you know that? A lot of people think how much milk your baby drinks at month 3 is actually more than they drink in month 2. How much pressure is that? That is not the case. How much milk your baby drinks is going to stay the same for those first month 1 to month 6. And then what happens is we start to introduce solids, and it actually starts to decrease depending on how quickly your baby takes to solids. So remember that, okay? Take that pressure off of you. If you are working hard and you're already back at work and you're trying to maintain that stash, is you don't need to pump more and more and more and more and more as your baby grows. So the range of milk is going to be different. In 24 hours, it's about 570 to 900 mils. The other thing I want to remind you is how much milk your baby drinks each feed and each day is going to be slightly different. They are just smaller versions of us. We do not eat the same amount of food at every single meal. Your baby will be the same. Instead, we're asking ourselves, are they maintaining their growth curve? Do they have enough wet and dirty diapers? And are they settled at the bottle, at the breast? Okay, if yes to that, it's okay that we have days they take less and days they take more. Do not interpret that as you aren't making enough milk. And so let's talk about this. When I say 3 to 4 days of a freezer stash, you need to take these numbers and do the math. So if you are separated from your baby, let's say for 12 hours every day when you are back at work, that means you need and your baby takes 4 feeds in that time. You need 4 feeds worth of milk stored times 3 to 4 days. You don't need 24 hours worth of milk times 3 to 4 days. There's a huge difference there, because remember, when you are home with your baby, you are going to be feeding your baby. Okay, so don't put that pressure to have 24 hours worth of milk times 3 to 4 days. You just need, if you're gone from your baby, let's say for 12 hours, and we know they take about 4 bottles in that time, then you need 4 feeds worth times 3 days. Does that make sense? And okay, this is what I was talking about here. So do the math based on how long you'll be gone from your baby. But the other thing we need to talk about is, how do you pump at work? The first thing is, have a discussion with your employer before you go back. I am telling you that it is your legal right to have a place that you can pump in private with a locked door that is not a bathroom. A bathroom is not an appropriate place. You should be able to lock your office door or have a space that you can go to pump, okay? Have that conversation with your employer. The next thing is, set an alarm on your phone prompting you to pump. And I'm saying this with so much grace in my heart because I know this is hard. But what I want you to try to do is pump on your baby's schedule. So if you know they feed every 2 to 3 hours typically, I would like to see you try to pump that. And that's something you want to explain to your employer. These are the times that I'm going to be pumping. This shouldn't fall on your lunch break. You're allowed to have pumping breaks. So have that conversation with your employer. But that being said, I know that life happens, and I know that this isn't going to be perfect. And you can still maintain your milk supply knowing that there's going to be days this isn't always going to work. Let's say, best case scenario, you can lock your office or go somewhere and have a hands-free pump bra on and put your pump in and pump and continue whatever it is that you were working on. There's ways around it that you can do it. But if you miss one, don't give up. It's okay. It happens. Just get to it the next time. So if that means you have to pump twice an hour apart, whatever, I would still do it rather than ditch that pumping session completely. Try to make up for it, even if the timing isn't perfect. That's okay. But here's the other thing. Sometimes you are going to miss one and you're not going to be able to replace it. That is life. And that doesn't mean that you have to give up and that this isn't going to work. If that's the case, what I would do then is I would power pump once your baby goes down for bed. So once you get home to your baby, and I'm going to tell you in a little bit more about power pumping. But here's some other tips for maintaining your supply while you're back at work. Talk to daycare, whoever's watching your baby. For example, if you get off work at 4 and your baby needs a feed within half an hour of that, ask them if they can wait for you and feed when you get to daycare. Can they do a song and dance for your baby just to keep them satisfied for a little while longer? Obviously, if baby's frantic, we're going to give them a bottle. But if they're just starting to ramp up, can daycare work with you so that when you get to daycare, you can feed them? Because that's an extra stimulation at the breast that you've provided, and it'll be great for your milk supply. The other thing is on the flip side. So right when you drop your baby off, I would offer one more time. Give yourself an extra 15-minute buffer so that when you get to daycare or wherever's watching your baby, you can offer the breast one more time. That extra stimulation, even if they only nurse a few minutes, matters. The other thing we should talk about is reverse cycling. So what this means, it can be really helpful. It is not a forever tool because I see you are trying to work, you're trying to pump, you're trying to feed, and at some point you need to sleep. But what reverse cycling is feeding your baby in the night. So you offer more feeds in the night. They take more calories in the night and less in the day. This is really good for a baby who's struggling with the bottle. I have floods of DMs every day about parents stressed out because they're going back to work and their baby won't take a bottle. Reverse cycling is one piece of our plan to get your baby taking a bottle. It's a short-term solution and you need support if you're doing it, but it is an option. And so here's the other thing. If you are returning to work and you start pumping and we are building the stash and things are going well, do not forget the bottle. This is a skill that we need in order for this to work. And so if you can offer a bottle in those first 12 weeks, that will help you. But don't just offer it once and then quit. Offer every single day. Like I mentioned, it doesn't need to replace a feed, but you want to be able to give at least an ounce every day. It's like muscle memory. If your baby knows how to drink from a bottle, you will feel so less stressed when you're returning to work. If you're struggling with this, reach out for some help for sure, because it is so stressful if your baby won't take a bottle. Now I want to talk to all of you who are exclusive pumpers or who are thinking about exclusively pumping. This is a beautiful solution for a lot of people. And if this is you, I see you. It is a huge job, but you can do it and it's sustainable. But how can we make it easier? And one way is to have a buffer of milk. Similar to those that are returning back to work, having a buffer of milk, if you are an exclusive pumper, takes a little bit of that anxiety off. I would pump, 1 or 2 days worth of milk and have it in your freezer. It just allows for those off days where you missed a pump because the baby is so fussy or, life happened, right? You don't want to do that consistently, but we need to be realistic in realizing that that happens. And so what you need to do is build a pumping schedule for yourself that mimics your baby's feeding schedule. And you need to pump as many times as your baby feeds in a 24-hour period. So not how much the internet tells you, but your baby. If they feed 14 times, then we're going to pump 14 times. If they feed 6 times, we're going to pump 6 times. If your baby is feeding overnight, you need to pump overnight. That's important. And even if your baby is young and sleeping through the night, and if that's you, I am so happy for you. But if they are under 12 weeks and going very long stretches in the night, I would still get up and pump. And I know that is horrendous advice, but if you can, I would do it, because what happens in that postpartum period sets you up for long-term milk supply. So that extra stimulation in the night when your prolactin levels are high sets you up for longer-term supply so that you don't swing and have a supply issue down the road. So here are some options for those of you who are thinking of exclusively pumping. So you can pump and then give your baby the bottle of milk. Or you can pump or give your baby a bottle of previously expressed breast milk and then pump. And then the third way is you can give your baby a bottle and then you can put them down for sleep and then you can pump while they're sleeping. And there is no wrong way to do this. It just needs to equal the amount of feeds your baby is taking in 24 hours. I will say option number 1 can be tricky. Going back to our hungry baby, they're not tolerant about waiting. So that can be stressful. It can cause anxiety while you're pumping. You might cut the pump short. But if you don't want to spend all that time when your baby's sleeping pumping, doing a hybrid between 2 and 3 can be really helpful. If you use a pumping bra, and get going and, talk to your baby, play with your baby while they're awake, you can check that off the list. You're going to find what works best for you. So now let's talk about ways that we can increase the amount of output each pumping session. So heat can be your friend. So if you have a hot pack or a heating pad, if you put that on your chest 5 minutes before you pump, that can increase output. Massage is another thing. Massage your breast before you pump. That can increase output as well as while you're pumping. The other thing is know that you will have more than one letdown while you're pumping. And if you can pump through that, you will yield more milk. just like when your baby is feeding. What happens is when your baby is feeding directly at the breast, your milk lets down 2-3 times, sometimes more. It really depends on the person. And you can do this when you're pumping. And one secret with the Annabella pump, when you're doing this, is if you want another letdown, I would turn up the tongue. That stimulation, that nipple stimulation is what causes our milk to let down. So this is a good trick if you are using the Annabella pump. But if you can pump through that letdown, you will yield more milk. The other thing is power pumping. So anytime you're concerned about decreasing volumes, maybe your baby's sleeping longer stretches, maybe you had a really tough day at work and you didn't pump as much as you wanted to, or maybe you're an exclusive pumper and your baby needed you so much you just didn't pump, or maybe you just feel like they're going through a growth spurt and you want to bolster your supply, you can power pump. And I have a slide on it I'm going to show you in a minute. Hands-on pumping, like I said, lots of breast compression while you're pumping. And like I said, that stimulation here can yield more letdowns. And Annabella actually did a study with women pumping, and it showed that they can pump up to 50% more milk when they use their pump, which I think is great. And lastly, your flange needs to fit. Make sure your flange fits. That should be the first place you go if you think you're not pumping enough milk. So now let's talk about power pumping. So power pumping is double pumping. So Annabella is a double pump. And what you're going to do, it mimics a growth spurt. And this is not a tool to be using every day. If you are power pumping every day, I would encourage you to reach out for support because that's a lot of work to maintain your supply. Something's going on. Power pumping is a tool that you can use once a week or through a growth spurt, or if you had a hard day, like I mentioned. Don't power pump in the morning. Power pump in the evening. Once your baby is in bed and you're going to have an hour's worth of time. The next thing is you don't judge your success of power pumping based by how much milk is in here. You're not going to pump a lot of milk late in the evening because your prolactin levels are lower. It is the stimulation during power pumping that's important. You are going to see the results from this a day or two later. Okay, so don't panic if you don't get a lot of milk. You're going to get a snack, you're going to get a drink, you're going to turn on your favorite show, and then we're going to do 20 minutes on, 10 minutes off, 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off, 10 minutes on. Total pump time is 60 minutes. Don't do it more than once a day. If you're needing to do that, I would reach out and let's figure out why. Now let's talk about cleaning your pump. First of all, I hope you have help. This is such a job on top of helping care for your baby, but you have so many people in your life who want to help. This is a great job to suggest. And what you're going to do is just make sure your hands are clean, your workspace clean. You're going to rinse your pump and bottle parts with warm water, soapy water. Then we're going to rinse them thoroughly, and then you're going to sanitize them. And you want to make sure that you sanitize them in rolling boiling water for like 2 to 5 minutes and let them air dry. How do we store all this milk that we've been pumping? And so I'm sharing with you CDC recommendations. I realize that there's people here from all over the world. Thank you. But your recommendations might be a little bit different based on where you live. But what I want to say to you is if you just freshly pumped breast milk, it can sit on your counter for 4 hours. It can be in the fridge for up to 4 days. And the freezer, 6 months is ideal, but it can be stored up to 12. If you are taking out, a bag of frozen breast milk, these are the rules. So it can, once it's thawed, be sit out 1 to 2 hours. It can be in the fridge up to 1 day, de-thawing, but you never want to refreeze it. Just like if you have frozen meat, you take it out and then you're like, I I didn't make supper. You can't put it back in the freezer. It's the same thing. And if you have milk in a bottle, you want to use this milk. If your baby didn't want it, you want to use it within 2 hours. And I say this for those of you who have newborns and you're in that fussy evening stage. It's very normal for your newborn to want to cluster feed. So if they take a little and they fall asleep, you can offer that bottle again as long as it's within the 2-hour window. And that's why it's really important to store your milk in 1, 2, and 3 ounce bags, because you're going to waste less. And I want to leave you, before we jump into questions, with a message that I see you. I know that some of you follow along with me on Instagram. Thank you so much for that. And I see how much work and effort and love and care you put into your baby every single day. It makes me emotional just thinking about it. And I want you to know that you are exactly what your baby needs, even on the days it doesn't feel like it. I think that this parenting gig can feel like a lot, whether your baby's 2 days old, 2 months old, 2 years old, or 16 years old. And I also know that infant feeding, ensuring your baby has enough, is a constant load that you're carrying around. And I just want you to know that you're doing it. It is enough. You're doing a good job and you deserve support. And I want you to know that you also have the right to change your mind. How you choose to feed your baby may evolve over time, and that's okay too. You're going to choose what's best for you and your baby and your family unit. So thank you. Thank you so much for following along through this big presentation. I hope you found it helpful. And I really want to thank Annabella for sponsoring this webinar. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to share more about pumping. They were so gracious to give a coupon code to anybody who's watching. I'm just dropping it in the link now. That link will take you directly where the coupon code is applied, and I'll send it out in an email as well. And the other thing is that this pump is often covered through insurance. And so they shared the link with me as well. So if you want to check your insurance, you can use that link there to check if it's covered, because how awesome is that? So that's awesome. And if you want to follow them or go to their website, you can find it there. But huge thank you, Annabella. Thank you for the opportunity. And thank you to all of you who have followed along and have listened to this webinar. I hope you found value. Now I'm going to dive into the chat. I can see it's been really going, and I'm going to try and answer as many questions as I can. Oh, here we go. How much alcohol is safe when pumping? So there's no black and white answer to this. You should talk to your care provider, but essentially no amount of alcohol is safe for anybody. But the rule of thumb is similar to feeding your baby from the breast. So if you had a glass of wine, the rule is if you are able, you're not intoxicated, then you can feed your baby. The same with pumping. You could pump. If you have had too much to drink, you shouldn't be caring for your baby, pumping or breastfeeding. I'm going to scroll to the top. My baby is 8 weeks old and exclusively breastfeeding every 2 to 3 hours during the day. We are now just beginning to get 5 to 6 hour stretches at night. I plan to begin pumping after my first morning feed to begin to freezer stash. Will pumping cause an oversupply? No. It's slow and steady, okay? Ease into it. When you are starting to build a freezer stash, don't add 100 pumping sessions. And also think about the extra stuff. I wouldn't have a silicone pump and be pumping, because that potentially could be creating an oversupply. Start with one pump and see how your baby does. Then you could maybe add in a second one, Okay, just slow and steady. Also, will my breasts eventually regulate on their own if we are sleeping longer stretches? They will. Our bodies are incredible. If your baby, like 5 to 6 hours, I wouldn't get up to pump for that unless you have underlying breastfeeding issues and you've been like working really hard to maintain your supply. But if things are going okay, I would just roll with it. Let them sleep. But if your baby's sleeping longer than that, 8 hours in those first 12 weeks, I would do a pumping session. Not forever, but just because, like I said, what we do in those first 12 weeks paints the picture for a long-term milk supply. Would it make a difference if I pumped at my first week, stopped because of an oversupply, then milk dropped, and I'm trying to start pumping again at 5 months? Your body will just have to adjust to the pump again. But the good news is you did a little pumping in the beginning, so your body will respond. But the biggest thing you can do is make sure that your flange fits properly and slow and steady hands-on pumping. I am going back to work next week. I see you. I pump sporadically. How do I make a pumping schedule while I'm still at home? So again, we are practicing the bottle, but the biggest thing you can do is just get started on a freezer stash. I might pump once in the morning, once in the afternoon. Do that for the week. Maybe add in one power pumping session in that week, and then save what you get and really go back to those pumping tips that I talked about when you're going back to work. Oh man, my 4-month-old just randomly started rejecting the bottle. Wah, wah. That is so hard when they do that. The biggest thing you need to do is not force it. If you force that because we're stressed, I get it, it will create an aversion. Slow way down and I'll go back to just this. And we're just touching the collar. I did a reel about this yesterday, but if you touch the collar to your baby's lip, wait for them to accept. If they don't, we honor that and try again in the afternoon. If they open, let them suck. You want to see 10 consecutive sucks like this before you even put any milk in it. When they can suck 10 consecutive times, I would drop some milk in here. Once they can do that, then you can add milk to the bottle. Slow it down and reintroduce, and you should have success. I exclusively breastfeed. I'm going back to work soon, worried about pumping. I can only pump 2 to 3 ounces each session, even when I haven't nursed beforehand. That's enough. Remember what I said about babies drinking, like 90 to 120 mils on average is what a baby takes. We have told ourselves the story that might not be enough, but your baby is probably getting more than that. And so what I would do is, like I said, start pumping in the morning, maybe add one pumping session in the afternoon, lots of hands-on pumping, consider that extra stimulation mode, and slowly but surely build that breastfeeding stash. How can I start pumping enough ounces a day at work without pumping every 2 hours on baby's schedule? If you can't pump every 2 hours, I would pump every 3 and maybe choose to power pump a couple times a week. After pumping, is it normal for nipples to be somewhat purple in color? Okay, this is hard because I can't see you and I haven't done a full assessment, but what I will say is that pumping should not hurt. Sometimes people have something called Raynaud's. And again, I can't see you, so this isn't me saying this is what it is, but I want you to think about it. If breastfeeding hurts, or if pumping hurts, or if your nipples hurt even when they're open to air, it could be Raynaud's. There's stuff we can do to help with that. One thing I would recommend trying is warming your breasts before you pump and see if that makes a difference. If it does, you should reach out for some support because we can help with that. Thank you for being here. Oh, that's really nice. Okay. My questions around pumping are because of my concern around supply, particularly from one breast. She's been getting increasingly fussy and frustrated at the left breast during the day and stays at that breast less and less. I feel like it's a vicious cycle. How should I go about pumping? Okay, so your body has enough. Lots of people feed their baby off one breast. That's doable. But what I would do is start feeding her off this one, the one that she likes, and pump every time off the one that she doesn't. Because what we need to do is bolster that supply. Then what I would do is once you have that settled, so do it for 3-4 days, then start feeding her off that one at night for a few days. Start on that one, finish on the one she likes. Then incorporate it into the daytime. Can or should you pump during late pregnancy? Such a good question. You need to check with your care provider, but yes, there's circumstances where you can't, like a placenta previa. If you're at huge risk of preterm labor, have a conversation, but usually at 37 weeks, you can hand express and or pump and build that freezer stash. Not for like going back to work freezer stash, but colostrum. Your body will produce colostrum at the end of your pregnancy. You can store it, bring it in with you to have your baby, and then if you get separated, your baby can have that milk instead of formula. Should the flange size be 2 millimeters bigger than the actual size or the same size as your nipple? It depends. So then I go with the same size, but you don't want the nipple to be like rubbing and sore. If you notice that, then you're going to size up. Does the power pump really work? Sure does. It's one of my favorite tips. Hello, I'm exclusively breastfed 6 months postpartum due to financial issues. I could not buy a pump in my first 12 weeks. I'm going back to work in April. I want to establish my supply for pumping, but whenever I pump now and afterwards, when I try to feed my baby, my supply is not enough for him. What I would do is make sure your pump's fitting properly. And you need to feed your baby and then pump. Just reverse the two and know that your body is going to catch up. Lots of hand expression while you're feeding your baby. And I would maybe even power pump a couple times a week. Can I talk about the relactation process? That is a long talk. It's a webinar all on its own, but I can tell you it can be done, but you need support. I actually have a blog about it. If you go to my Instagram stories today, you'll see it. Go there and take a look. How much does the average woman pump in session total from both breasts? Great question. If you have already fed your baby or if you are breastfeeding your baby plus pumping, it is completely typical to get 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce combined. It's not a lot, okay? Some get more, some get less. Do you recommend an electric massager? No, I don't think you need it. Yeah. Hand expression or compression works. And then the stimulation mode on this pump also helps a lot on the Annabella. It's right here. You can see it. My baby only eats for 4 minutes per side when breastfeeding. I find that when I pump for 15 to 20 minutes, there's no more milk after the 5-minute mark. Should I be pumping even though milk's not coming out? So I would make sure your flange fits properly. I would also not time your feeds at the breast. I would see if, like, you might have really fast flow and that might be it. If you're, but if you want another letdown, do a lot of breast compression, or like I said, use that stimulation mode to see if you can have another letdown and pump past it and see if your milk lets down again. I'm experiencing tingling, shooting pains in my nipples after pumping and sporadically in between pumps. It's also worse when I'm cold. Yes, this is what I was talking about earlier with Raynaud's. I have seen so many women stop pumping, stop feeding over this. You deserve support. There's a million things we can do, but we need to do a full assessment. You shouldn't have to struggle with that. The biggest thing right now that you can do today is hot pack on your breast before you feed your baby, then feed your baby, then hot packs again. And there's different medications that we can try that you take for a short stint that resolve it. But again, we need to do a full assessment. How much should you provide a 1-month-old of pump milk, breast milk in a bottle? Usually breastfed, so I don't know how much he gets. So like I mentioned in this, most babes take about 570, what is it? Around like between 700 and 900 mils of milk divided by how many feeds your baby takes. And so it's usually around 90 to 120 mils of feed. And the best way to do it is pace feed and watch your baby. Not this way, because you're not going to know. They'll just drink the whole bottle. You want to give your baby control like they have with bottle feed, breastfeeding, where they stop and start and we honor it when they're done. How do you know if the volume you're pumping per pumping session is enough to satisfy your baby's need for a feed? Again, you use those rough numbers that I showed you back in this presentation, and I'll send you the recording. You can watch it again and follow your baby's going to take about 90 to 120 mils depending on how old they are. I've been triple feeding for 10 weeks and I'm exhausted. My babies suck, hasn't improved at all, so we're getting somewhat stagnated with getting stronger at the breast. Please reach out for support and use my method that I suggested here. 30 minutes pumping. I exclusively pump and I get 3 letdowns a session. 70% of the time it happens in 20-25 minutes, but sometimes it takes up to 35. I get it with exclusively pumping. You have good data here. I would see if you ramp up the stimulation and the breast compression, if you can get that 3rd letdown earlier. And I would also pay attention to how much extra milk you pump after that 3rd letdown. Is it worth it or not? If you can tolerate 35 minutes, it's okay if you're exclusively pumping, but I think it's probably not going to make a huge difference. Like, would it be better to shorten your pumping and maybe add a power pumping session a couple times a week just to save you those minutes in the day? I've done triple feeding a few times. It's so hard. I'm now exclusively pumping and bottle feeding. I would love to increase my output. Use those suggestions that I suggested earlier about increasing pumping. Oh, Juan, you're doing triple feeding. I see you. Yay to Caitlin, you're off triple feeding. I'm 6 months postpartum and notice a significant decrease when I pump at work. I work long shifts and each time I pump, it's less and less. The flange size seems good. Is there anything else? I pump for 30 to 40 minutes and it's still not emptying fully. I would book a consultation. You need a healthcare provider because something's not right there. Your breast should be emptying. Yeah, it's good that you brought that up. Is it okay for feeds to be really short? Yes, yes. How long your baby feeds does not equate to how much milk they're drinking. Don't watch the clock, watch your baby. Any advice when one breast seems to produce more milk than the other? Little to no milk on the left breast when pumping versus 3 to 4 on the right breast per session. I would check your flange size. Sometimes you need different ones on different breasts, and I would adjust it. And I would reach out for some support on that. If you're exclusively pumping both breasts, something's up there. High lipase is tricky. It is totally fine with fresh. Your baby will drink fresh breast milk, but when you freeze it and thaw it, it's going to smell soapy, kind of rancid. The best thing you can do is it's tricky because the more fresh breast milk your baby can take, the better. Scalding the milk seems to be our only trick for that. You wish you had this seminar 3 months ago. I see you. I'm glad you made it here. And what you're doing is enough. If you want support, reach out. I have a 6-month-old baby who's just starting solids. I wasn't pumping at all. Now I want to pump. Yeah, it's not too late. And if I would recommend the bottle once in a while technique if you want to mix breast milk with solids. It's a great idea. Yeah. So, breast compression. You want to move your fingers back your areola and we're squeeze and hold. And remember that you have ducts all the way around your breast. So we've got the pump on and we're squeeze and hold. Squeeze and hold. I would go all the way around both breasts. Hand expression's a little different. It's counterintuitive. You're not pulling out, you're going back to your chest wall and squeeze. Back to your chest wall and squeeze and go all the way around. I'm working on building supply. Is it okay if you use a silicone pump on one side while the baby feeds on the other breast? To get the most stimulation, you should be using an electric pump. That is what's known as passive suction. It does help a little bit, but to get the most bang for your buck, I would use an electric pump. I wish I had that triple feeding tips when your baby was a newborn. Next one, and thanks for following. How do you know if you have the correct size? Remember, watch this again. You're going to measure the diameter of your nipple, or if you have the Annabella pump, just fit your nipple right into their measure finder. My baby was taking a bottle of pump milk from week 6 to 10. All of a sudden he refuses and cries. How can we help him get back to the bottle? Oh, like what I said, okay? Go back to the basics. And the other thing that is a myth, if you feed your baby, you have that trusted feeding relationship. If your baby's exclusively breastfed, I would say you do it. It's not forever that you'll have to, but if you are the one to teach your baby to take a bottle, often it can go better than having your husband or your partner do it. For each 15 to 20 minute pump section after breastfeeding, sometimes the milk runs dry after 10 minutes. Do we continue to dry pump? You can. It depends on why you're pumping. If you're pumping to build supply, you could do breast compression. You could turn on the tongue stimulation, get another letdown. Or if you're just pumping for once in a while and you got enough milk, then that's okay. If you are trying to increase your supply, how can you tell if it's increased by the amount you pump? It will be, if your pump fits properly, yes. If you are working to not triple feed anymore, the longer your baby can tolerate staying at the breast and the less supplementation they need on either end is a really good indicator. How your baby behaves at the breast is the best way to know. If a baby's sleeping through the night, I would get up to pump if you're in that first 12 weeks. It is normal to be able to pump with an electric pump and not the Haka, like a silicone pump. It's passive pumping and much different. For pumping sometimes, with the schedule you showed as in an example, is that every day or only on the days you want to offer a bottle? It depends on how much you're offering a bottle. If it's every day, I would pump every day. If you just give a bottle every now and then, you don't need to do it every day. But I would practice with your baby often so they don't forget the skill. Yeah. Oh, going back to work next week. Look at all these people going back to work. I see you. Oh, this is a good question. What about melatonin in evening milk versus morning milk? I started pumping in the morning and people told me it shouldn't work for a bottle in the evening. There's really not a lot of research around this. You could label it hypothetically, but you absolutely can give your baby morning milk in the evening and it will be okay. Oh, I see all of you who say you're going back to work. If you get enough with a silicone collector every once in a while, that's okay. Look at all of you. Can you give More info on how to properly stimulate the breast. So it's breast compression, just like I said. Can you damage milk ducts by doing breast compression too hard? No. But what you can cause damage by is if you have plugged ducts. So we now call that ductal narrowing. Really aggressive massage, you shouldn't be doing that. And you shouldn't be using an electric vibrator or a toothbrush on it either. Working nights, any suggestions on pumping schedule to optimize my sleep during the day as well on the nights I don't work? Okay, so when you're working night shift, I would pump as often as you can. I would pump right before you go to bed, and I would feed your baby right before you go to bed. There's no great way for this. Other than I see you, and that's hard. You know, when you get up to use the washroom, pump, put the pump on. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Mm-hmm. Okay, how much your baby will determine needing in one day. Use those ranges that I gave you based on how much he feeds. If you know your baby feeds 8 times, when I send this to you, go back to that slide and divide it by 8. I'm not sure how much my baby is drinking. Go back to the range and then divide it by how many feeds they have in a day. I exclusively pump because my baby was in the NICU and won't latch on the breast. I see you, Madison. You have been through so much. How can I build a supply to return to work when he is taking everything I pump via bottle? So just like you have to add extra pumping sessions in. That's what you need to do. Yeah. I have created an oversupply. I'm struggling to reduce it down. Oh, okay. We can help you with this, Elizabeth, but you need help and support. It needs to be done gradually. Mm-hmm. Advice for pumping when you're a teacher with a class full of grade ones. I have worked with teachers before, and technically they should be supporting you. Your administration should be supporting you to leave that classroom and pump. It's actually legislation based on where you live. My best suggestion would be, can you even build a corner in your office that's private? Talk to your administration about it. That's tricky. You have a big job try to pump plus caring for other people's babies. Well, you're in Italy. Your baby eats 180 mils. I exclusively pump and feed with the bottle. I tried power pumping. I tried to pump longer. You need to add in more pumping sessions probably, and we need to take a look at what's going on with your pump. Mm-hmm. They need to be providing you a fridge at work, Abigail. Someone's asking about that. There needs to be a place for you to store your milk. There's so many questions here. I'm going to answer 3 more, and then what happens is we'll take it to my Instagram. I'm going to do a video on pumping today. Come and put your comment there, and I'll get back to you. So if I'm just pumping, sometimes my baby snacks. Does this mean I need to pump still? I'm not sure about that one. My baby is almost 6 months and doesn't take the bottle. Okay, switch plans. If that's your baby, then you're going to switch to a straw. So I would pump the milk and put it in here. And your 6-month-old baby, I love this one, but there's other ones. You can squeeze and the milk will come up the straw. It's a great way to teach them. Show them how to do it too. And then by gently squeezing, you'll find your baby takes way more volume than a traditional sippy cup. You're 5.5 months postpartum. Is it too late? No, it is not too late to increase supply. Yeah. Your pump parts need to be washed in hot soapy water after each use, and it depends on the pump and where you live in terms of how often they should be sterilized. You should check your guidelines on where you live. Mhm. In all pumping sessions, is it necessary to massage your breast? The more you massage your breast, the more output you'll have. I would aim to do it for half of your pumping sessions. My partner gives our 2 months baby 2 bottles in the night so I can have some sleep. I've been waking up to pump every 3 hours nevertheless, not to impact my milk supply, but my baby is now sleeping longer stretches of 5 hours, and I've created a mechanical oversupply. I feel very engorged if I do not get up to pump every 3 hours. So what I would do is, instead of just cutting that pump out, I would slow down. Slowly decrease the amount of time you're pumping so that you can eventually just stop and skip it altogether. But sometimes if you stop cold turkey, you can create ductal inflammation and what we used to call plugged ducts and mastitis. I'm an 8 months postpartum. I'm slight undersupplier and sometimes just enoughers. That's great. I'm pumping 6 times a day, including middle of the night. Is this my forever? No. No, 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 no. It doesn't have to be that way, Heather. It sounds like you've worked really hard for these 8 months to feed your baby. I think it's hard for me to say, but I think we could skip that middle of the night pumping session. Could you add in a power pumping session a couple times a week and see if that makes a difference right before you go to bed? Because that's hard. Last one. I'm a physician returning to work. My front desk is building time into my schedule to pump, but my management is not reducing the number of patients I see. Therefore, that time being built into my schedule is actually non-existent since patients run over. I would talk to management again, because that isn't right. It is legislation that you be allowed to pump. And if I've worked with people who have reported it, and they can report anonymously and have that change. I am so sorry that you have that stress on top of that. I wish I could talk to management for you because it's so important. So what I would do is, can you even shorten up the amount of pumping sessions that maybe break it up? So for example, just knowing how you work in a clinic, if you see a patient for 7 minutes and then you chart for 5, can you put your pump on and pump for 5 and do that 8 times and then get in full pumping sessions when you can? The more you can stimulate your breast, the better, even if it isn't perfect. The other thing I would suggest is reverse cycling with your baby in the evening. I know that is not sustainable either, but until you figure out a rhythm, that is what I would do. Yeah. Okay, guys, there's so many comments and I want to answer them all, but what we're going to do is watch for my post this afternoon. Come there and I'll get to them. But I want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart for being here, for being a part of my community, for showing up and listening and taking something from this. I see you. I know how hard you're working with your baby, and I'm sending you so, so much love and support. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I will see you this afternoon over on Instagram.